Hello, and welcome back to this quiet corner of the night. Whether you're here because sleep feels elusive, because your mind is humming with the day's echoes, or because you've noticed something different about certain nights, perhaps when the moon hangs full and bright outside your window, you're in the right place. Let your breathing slow. We're going to explore something together tonight, something both ancient and immediate, something that might explain why on certain nights, sleep seems to dance just beyond reach. You might have felt it yourself. Those nights when the bedroom feels too bright, even with curtains drawn, when thoughts move like slow rivers instead of settling into stillness. When you lie awake not anxious, exactly, but alert, as if some part of you is listening for something you can't quite name. Perhaps you've glanced at the calendar later and noticed it was near the full moon, or maybe you've heard others mention it. Nurses working night shifts, teachers who swear their students act differently during certain lunar phases, parents who notice their children's sleep patterns shifting with the sky. We can rest here, in this wondering. For thousands of years, humans have suspected that our sleep dances to rhythms larger than ourselves. Not just the obvious rhythm of day turning to night, but subtler pulses, the gentle tug of seasons, the whisper of weather systems, and yes, the ancient pull of our moon as it waxes and wanes through its eternal cycle. Modern science, with its careful measurements and controlled studies, has begun to listen to these old suspicions with new ears. What it's discovering is both surprising and somehow deeply familiar. Our brains, it seems, may still be attuned to the lunar rhythms that once guided our ancestors through nights without electric light, through seasons marked not by calendars but by the changing face of the moon. The evidence arrives quietly, like moonlight through a window you forgot to shade. Sleep researchers in Switzerland discovered that during full moon periods, their study participants took 5 minutes longer to fall asleep and slept for 20 minutes less overall. Their deep sleep phases shortened, as if something was gently stirring them toward wakefulness. Other studies have found similar whispers in the data. Brain activity during certain moon phases shows distinct patterns. REM sleep, that strange vital time when dreams flourish, seems to ebb and flow with lunar tides. Melatonin levels, the hormone that helps guide us towards sleep, fluctuate in ways that mirror the moon's brightness. You might feel your shoulders settling now, your breathing finding its own deeper rhythm. This isn't about becoming a prisoner to lunar phases or checking moon calendars before bedtime. It's about understanding that we are part of something larger and older than the electric-lit nights of modern life. Our sleep patterns, our brain rhythms, the very chemistry that guides us toward rest, all of it may still be quietly responsive to the same celestial dance that our great-great-grandparents knew by heart. The moon, after all, has been humanity's night companion for as long as we've had eyes to see it. Before streetlights and smartphones, before indoor plumbing and reliable heating, the moon was how we measured time, planned harvests, and navigated darkness. It makes sense that our bodies might still remember these ancient relationships, even in our climate-controlled bedrooms. Tonight, we're going to explore this gentle inheritance together. We'll walk through the science softly, pausing often to let the ideas settle. We'll visit the stories humans have told about lunar sleep across cultures and centuries. We'll discover what happens in our brains when moonlight touches our eyes, and why some nights feel different from others in ways we can't quite articulate. There's no urgency in this exploration. If you drift away during our journey, that's perfectly natural. If you find yourself alert and curious, that's welcome too. The moon, after all, has patience. It has been cycling through its phases for billions of years, long before humans existed to notice its glow. We can breathe together here in this moment. Sometimes the most profound truths are also the simplest ones. We are not separate from the natural world, despite how it might feel when we're surrounded by concrete and artificial light. Our bodies still carry the wisdom of ancestors who lived by lunar calendars, who planted and harvested by moon phases, who understood sleep as part of a larger rhythm that connected them to the cosmos above. On those nights when sleep feels different, when you lie awake not troubled, but somehow more present, more aware of the subtle energies that move through your body and mind, perhaps you're experiencing an echo of this ancient attunement. Your nervous system might be responding to signals so subtle that we're only beginning to understand them with our scientific instruments. The full moon outside your window isn't keeping you awake out of some mystical force, but it might be subtly influencing the complex chemistry of your brain in ways that connect you to millions of years of human experience under the same celestial light. Let your eyes grow heavy if they want to. This isn't a problem to solve, but a rhythm to understand. These lunar influences on our sleep aren't strong enough to override our basic need for rest, but they might be strong enough to add texture to our nights, to make some evenings feel charged with a quiet energy, others soft with an unusual depth of peace. As we begin this exploration together, imagine yourself as part of an unbroken chain of humans who have looked up at the moon and wondered about its influence on their inner lives. From ancient astronomers in Babylon to modern neuroscientists in sleep laboratories, we've been asking similar questions. How does the cosmos touch the intimate space of our dreams? What happens when celestial rhythms meet the electrical patterns of our minds? The answers are still being discovered, measured in brain waves and hormone levels, in the careful observations of sleep researchers and the accumulated wisdom of night shift nurses. But the questions themselves are as old as consciousness, as persistent as the moon's return each night to our sky. We have all the time we need to explore these mysteries together. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body settle into whatever position feels most comfortable. The moon above us tonight, whether it's a slender crescent or a full silver disk, is the same moon that has watched over human sleep for millennia. And tonight, it watches over ours. The first humans to notice the moon's influence on sleep probably didn't think of it as influence at all. They simply lived it, the way you might notice that certain nights feel different without knowing why. Picture them for a moment. Our ancestors, 50,000 years ago, gathered around fires that pushed back just enough darkness to create a circle of safety. Above them, the same moon we see tonight moved through its phases, sometimes bright enough to cast shadows, sometimes absent entirely, leaving only starlight to mark the boundary between earth and sky. Let your breathing settle into this ancient rhythm. They had no electric lights to confuse their internal clocks, no screens glowing blue-white in the hours before sleep. Their bodies responded to the natural progression of darkness and light, with a precision we can barely imagine now. But even in that darkness, they must have noticed. Some nights brought deeper sleep, others a restless awareness that kept hunters alert and mothers attuned to their children's breathing. The moon was their calendar, their nightlight, their timekeeper. They tracked its phases to know when game would be most active, when tides would expose shellfish beds, when certain plants would be ready for harvest. It makes sense that their sleep too would have moved to this lunar rhythm. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans have been paying careful attention to lunar cycles for at least 30,000 years. Cave paintings in France show detailed observations of moon phases. Ancient bone artifacts from Africa display carved marks that correspond precisely to lunar months. These weren't casual observations. They were sophisticated systems for tracking time and natural rhythms. We can rest in this knowledge of our ancestors' careful attention. The ancient Babylonians, those master astronomers of the Fertile Crescent, developed lunar calendars so precise they could predict eclipses centuries in advance. But they also recorded something else in their clay tablets, observations about human behavior during different moon phases. They noticed that certain ailments seemed to peak during full moons, that sleep disturbances followed predictable patterns, that emotional states seemed to ebb and flow with celestial tides. In ancient Egypt, priests kept detailed records of temple activities, including when sacred dreams were most likely to occur. These records, decoded by modern archaeologists, show a clear correlation between certain moon phases and reported dream experiences. The full moon, they noted, brought dreams that were more vivid, sometimes prophetic, often difficult to forget upon waking. Traditional Chinese medicine, with its careful mapping of energy flows through the human body, has always included lunar influences in its understanding of health and sleep. The ancient texts describe how qi, the life energy that moves through our bodies, responds to celestial rhythms. During full moons, they observed this energy tends to rise toward the head, creating alertness that can interfere with the downward flow needed for deep sleep. These weren't superstitions, but careful observations accumulated over thousands of years. Our ancestors were skilled at noticing patterns that escaped quick detection, at reading the subtle signs that connected human experience to natural rhythms. Let your shoulders release any tension they might be holding. Indigenous cultures around the world developed sophisticated understandings of how lunar cycles affected human sleep and dreams. The Maasai of East Africa traditionally planned important ceremonies around specific moon phases, knowing that certain lunar moments brought heightened awareness and altered states of consciousness. Australian Aboriginal cultures incorporated lunar dreaming into their complex understanding of time and spiritual experience. In the Amazon rainforest, shamans have long used lunar calendars to time their healing ceremonies, understanding that the moon's phases affect not just the potency of medicinal plants but also the receptivity of human consciousness to their effects. They noticed that during certain lunar phases, people required less sleep but experienced more intense dreams. These traditional knowledge systems weren't mystical fantasies, but practical frameworks developed through careful observation of human behavior under different celestial conditions. When your great-grandmother said she couldn't sleep during full moons, she was drawing on generations of accumulated wisdom about how human bodies respond to lunar light. Modern sleep research is beginning to validate many of these ancient observations, though often with surprise at finding measurable effects where science expected to find only folklore. We can pause here, letting these ideas settle like sediment in still water. The transition from lunar-based timekeeping to solar calendars marked a profound shift in how humans related to natural rhythms. When we began organizing our lives around the sun's yearly cycle rather than the moon's monthly phases, we gained agricultural precision but lost something subtler, an attunement to the rhythmic pulses that had guided human consciousness for millennia. The invention of artificial lighting accelerated this disconnection. Gas lamps, then electric bulbs, then the blue glow of screens gradually severed our direct relationship with natural light cycles. We gained the ability to extend our productive hours, but lost the clear signals that had once coordinated our internal clocks with celestial rhythms. Yet something persisted. Even in our electrically lit modern world, people continued to report sleep disturbances during full moons. Hospital workers noticed patterns in patient behavior that seemed to follow lunar cycles. Parents observed changes in their children's sleep and mood that coincided with moon phases. For decades, mainstream science dismissed these observations as coincidence or confirmation bias. The gravitational forces that create ocean tides, researchers argued, are far too weak to influence the human body in any meaningful way. The additional light from a full moon, they calculated, is insignificant compared to the artificial illumination that floods our modern nights. But human biology, it turns out, is more sensitive than those early calculations assumed. Let your breathing deepen, following its own natural rhythm. The breakthrough came when researchers began using more sophisticated tools to measure brain activity during sleep. Instead of relying on subjective reports of sleep quality, they could track brain waves, hormone levels, and eye movements throughout entire sleep cycles. What they discovered was that the lunar influence on human sleep is real, subtle but measurably real. The mechanisms behind this influence are still being understood, but several factors seem to work together. Lunar light, even when filtered through clouds or curtains, affects melatonin production in ways that can shift our circadian rhythms. Gravitational variations, while tiny compared to oceanic tides, may influence the flow of cerebrospinal fluid in our brains and spinal cords. Electromagnetic variations associated with lunar cycles might interact with the bioelectrical activity of our nervous systems. None of these effects are strong enough to completely override our need for sleep or our ability to rest when tired. But together they create subtle influences that add texture to our nights, making some evenings feel different from others in ways our ancestors knew intimately, but we've largely forgotten how to read. The rediscovery of these lunar influences on human sleep represents more than just an interesting scientific finding. It's a reconnection with aspects of our humanity that industrialization temporarily obscured. We are learning that we remain, despite our technology, creatures whose biology still responds to the same celestial rhythms that guided our ancestors. This doesn't mean we need to return to living by lunar calendars or planning our lives around moon phases, but it might mean developing a gentler relationship with those nights when sleep feels different, when our minds seem more alert to subtle energies, when dreams arrive with unusual vividness or intensity. Your breath can be your anchor in this moment, steady and present. Modern research is also revealing individual variations in lunar sensitivity. Some people show strong correlations between moon phases and sleep patterns, while others seem largely unaffected. These differences might be genetic, related to variations in light sensitivity or circadian rhythm strength. They might be cultural, influenced by how much artificial light dominates our evening environments. They might even be psychological, connected to how much attention we pay to natural cycles. What's emerging from this research is not a one-size-fits-all relationship between lunar cycles and human sleep, but rather an appreciation for the subtle ways celestial rhythms continue to influence our biology. We're discovering that the boundary between our inner world and the cosmic environment is more porous than we assumed. The ancient wisdom keepers who tracked lunar influences on human consciousness weren't primitive or superstitious. They were careful observers who understood something we're only beginning to rediscover. We are not separate from the natural world, but intimately connected to it, down to the rhythms of our sleep and dreams. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, You carry within your cells the same biological heritage that responded to lunar rhythms for thousands of generations. Your ancestors who slept under star-filled skies, who woke to moonlight streaming through openings in caves or simple shelters, who planned their lives around the waxing and waning of celestial light. They are present in your DNA, in the ancient structures of your brain that still respond to signals from the cosmos above. We can rest in this connection, this unbroken thread that links your sleep tonight to the sleep of humans across millennia. The moon outside your window is the same companion that watched over all those who came before you, and its subtle influence on your rest is part of an ancient conversation between human consciousness and the rhythms of space and time. Let your eyes grow heavy if they wish. The exploration continues, but for now, you can simply be present to this moment, to your breath, to the quiet understanding that you are part of something much larger and more beautiful than the small concerns of any single day. The ancient tides still move through modern minds, gentle and persistent as moonlight on water. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the most recent full moon you can remember. Perhaps you glimpsed it rising over rooftops, casting long shadows across familiar streets. Maybe you noticed it through your bedroom window, bright enough to read by, bright enough to wake you from sleep with its silver presence. That light, ancient, reflected, traveling nearly 240,000 miles to reach your eyes, carries with it a story that neuroscience is only beginning to understand. When lunar photons touch your retina, they set in motion a cascade of biological responses that reach deep into the most primitive structures of your brain, into systems that have been responding to celestial rhythms since long before humans learned to make fire. Let your breathing slow as we explore this gentle science together. The human eye is an extraordinary instrument, capable of detecting individual photons under ideal conditions. But what makes it even more remarkable is how specialized different parts of our visual system have become for different kinds of light detection. We have cells in our retinas called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, though we can simply call them our light-sensing cells that exist not to help us see images but to help our brains track the passage of time. These cells are particularly sensitive to blue light, the kind that floods our world during daylight hours, but they also respond to other wavelengths, including the softer, more golden light of the moon. When moonlight enters your eyes, even through closed eyelids, even through curtains, these specialized cells send signals directly to a tiny region of your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. We can pause here, resting in the wonder of this intricate system. The suprachiasmatic nucleus, let's call it your body's master clock, is smaller than a grain of rice. It contains only about 20,000 neurons, a tiny fraction of your brain's total capacity. Yet this modest cluster of cells coordinates the timing of virtually every biological process in your body. It tells your liver when to produce certain enzymes, your kidneys when to concentrate urine, your heart when to slow or quicken its rhythm, and crucially, it orchestrates the complex chemical symphony that guides you towards sleep and wakefulness. When your light-sensing cells detect the brightness of a full moon, they send this information to your master clock. The signal isn't overwhelming. Moonlight is about 400,000 times dimmer than sunlight, but it's persistent and consistent. Your brain has evolved to pay attention to even these subtle changes in ambient light, because for millions of years they provided crucial information about safety, navigation, and optimal timing for different activities. The response to lunar light begins with a cascade of molecular signals. Your master clock receives the message that significant light is present, and begins to adjust the timing of various biological processes. One of the most important of these adjustments involves the production of melatonin, often called the sleep hormone. Melatonin isn't actually a simple sleep switch, though it's often described that way. It's more like a gentle dimmer, gradually preparing your body and mind for rest. Under normal circumstances, melatonin production begins to increase in the early evening as daylight fades. It reaches peak levels in the middle of the night, then gradually decreases toward morning, helping to coordinate your body's transition back toward wakefulness. Let your shoulders soften, releasing any tension they might be holding. But lunar light can subtly alter this melatonin rhythm. Studies conducted in carefully controlled laboratory environments have shown that exposure to even small amounts of light during what should be the dark hours of night can suppress melatonin production. The brighter the light, the stronger the suppression. A full moon, while much dimmer than electric lighting, can still create measurable changes in melatonin levels, particularly in people who are especially sensitive to light. This suppression doesn't usually eliminate melatonin entirely. You can still fall asleep during a full moon, still experience restorative sleep, but it can shift the timing and intensity of your body's preparation for rest, creating that subtle feeling of alertness that many people report during bright lunar phases. The effect is most pronounced in the hours before your normal bedtime and in the early hours of the morning. If you've ever found yourself lying awake at 3 a.m. during a full moon, aware but not anxious, alert but not agitated, you may have been experiencing this gentle melatonin suppression. Recent research has revealed that individual sensitivity to lunar light varies dramatically from person to person. Some people show strong melatonin suppression in response to relatively dim light, while others seem almost entirely unaffected by all but the brightest illumination. These differences appear to be partly genetic, related to variations in the proteins that detect light in our retinal cells, and variations in how our brains process these light signals. Age also plays a role. Children and teenagers often show stronger responses to lunar light than adults, which might explain why parents sometimes notice their children sleeping differently during full moons. The elderly, conversely, often show reduced light sensitivity, though they may experience lunar effects through other pathways we're still discovering. We can breathe together in this moment, letting these insights settle gently. But melatonin suppression is only one part of the story. Lunar light also affects other aspects of your brain's nighttime chemistry. Cortisol, often called the stress hormone, though it serves many functions beyond stress response, follows its own circadian rhythm that can be influenced by nighttime light exposure. Normally, cortisol levels drop to their lowest point in the middle of the night, contributing to the deep, restorative phases of sleep. Lunar light can cause a subtle elevation in nighttime cortisol levels, not enough to create the full alertness of daytime, but sufficient to shift your sleep toward lighter, more fragmented patterns. This isn't necessarily harmful, it might even be adaptive, keeping you slightly more responsive to environmental changes during the brightest nights. Growth hormone, which plays crucial roles in tissue repair and memory consolidation during sleep, also responds to light exposure. The intricate timing of growth hormone release can be shifted by lunar light, potentially affecting both the physical restoration that occurs during sleep and the processing of memories from the previous day. Temperature regulation, too, becomes part of this lunar symphony. Your body temperature naturally drops as bedtime approaches, a signal that helps trigger drowsiness. Exposure to bright light can interfere with this temperature drop, keeping your core temperature slightly elevated and contributing to that alert feeling that sometimes accompanies full moon nights. The interaction between lunar light and these various biological systems creates what researchers call a phase shift in your circadian rhythms. It's not dramatic enough to completely reverse your sleep-wake cycle, but it's sufficient to alter the texture of your nighttime experience. Let your breathing deepen, following its own natural pace. What makes this even more interesting is that these effects can persist for several days. Your circadian system doesn't reset immediately when light conditions change. It adjusts gradually, which means that the influence of a full moon on your sleep might be detectable for 2 or 3 nights on either side of the actual full moon phase. This gradual adjustment might explain why people often report sleep changes during the full moon period, rather than just on the single night when the moon is technically at its fullest. Your body is responding not just to the peak brightness, but to the several days of increasing and then decreasing lunar illumination. Modern neuroscience has also discovered that lunar light affects brainwave patterns during sleep in subtle but measurable ways. Deep sleep, characterized by slow, synchronized brainwaves called delta waves, can be shortened during full moon periods. REM sleep, the phase associated with vivid dreaming, shows different patterns of intensity and duration when lunar light is present. These changes in brainwave patterns aren't dramatic enough to prevent restorative sleep, but they do alter the architecture of your sleep cycles. You might spend slightly less time in the deepest phases of sleep, and slightly more time in the lighter phases where dreams are more likely to be remembered upon waking. Some researchers have proposed that this represents an ancient adaptive mechanism, a way for early humans to maintain slightly higher vigilance during the brightest nights, when both opportunities and dangers might be more apparent. The full moon that allowed for nighttime hunting and gathering also made human settlements more visible to predators and rival groups. Your brain, in other words, might still be responding to lunar light as if you were living in the prehistoric world where such vigilance had survival value. This isn't conscious or voluntary. It happens at the level of your most basic biological systems, operating below the threshold of awareness, but subtly influencing your experience of rest and alertness. We can rest here, appreciating the elegant complexity of these ancient systems. The discovery of these lunar effects on human neurobiology represents more than just an interesting scientific finding. It's a window into understanding how deeply we remain connected to natural rhythms, even in our artificially lit modern environment. The same biological systems that allowed our ancestors to navigate and survive in a world lit only by fire and celestial bodies continue to function within us, responding to signals we might not consciously notice. This doesn't mean that lunar light is the primary determinant of your sleep quality. The effects are subtle, easily overwhelmed by the bright artificial lighting that dominates most modern environments. If you live in a well-lit urban area, the influence of lunar light on your melatonin production is likely minimal compared to the effects of streetlights, electronic devices, and indoor illumination. But for those who live in darker environments, or who make an effort to reduce artificial light exposure in the evening hours, lunar influences on sleep can become more apparent. And even for those whose sleep is primarily governed by artificial lighting schedules, the lunar effects might still operate in the background, adding subtle texture to certain nights. Understanding these mechanisms can help us develop a more nuanced relationship with our own sleep patterns. Those nights when you lie awake feeling alert but not troubled, aware but not anxious, might be moments when your ancient circadian systems are responding to celestial signals that your conscious mind barely registers. There's something deeply satisfying about discovering that we are still, in these small but measurable ways, creatures of the natural world. Our brains, with all their sophistication and complexity, still listen to the same rhythms that guided consciousness across millions of years of human evolution. As you prepare for sleep tonight, you can rest in the knowledge that your brain is exquisitely attuned to the subtle variations in light that surround you. Whether the moon outside is bright or absent, your neural systems are quietly processing this information, coordinating the delicate chemistry of rest and restoration that will carry you through the night. The quiet science of lunar light continues its ancient work within you, connecting your sleep to rhythms larger than any single night, deeper than any individual dream. In this moment, you are part of an unbroken biological conversation between human consciousness and the cosmos that stretches from your ancestors gathered around ancient fires all the way to the furthest future of our species. Let your eyes close if they wish. The light that matters most right now is the gentle inner glow of a mind settling toward rest, guided by systems too wise and too old to need your conscious direction. In a sleep laboratory in Basel, Switzerland, something extraordinary happened on a series of July nights in 2013. 33 volunteers slept in carefully controlled rooms, their brain activity monitored by arrays of electrodes that tracked every subtle shift in their neural rhythms. The researchers weren't initially studying lunar effects, they were investigating other aspects of sleep architecture. But when they later analyzed their data, they discovered something that would quietly revolutionize our understanding of how celestial rhythms touch human consciousness. The volunteers who slept during the full moon showed distinctly different patterns of brain activity than those who slept during other lunar phases. Their deep sleep phases were shortened by an average of 30%. They took 5 minutes longer to fall asleep. Most remarkably, their brains showed reduced activity in the areas associated with deep restorative sleep, as if something was gently holding them closer to the threshold of wakefulness. Let your breathing settle into its own natural rhythm as we explore these electric mysteries together. To understand what these researchers discovered, we need to journey into the landscape of your sleeping brain, a territory as complex and varied as any earthly geography. When you close your eyes and drift towards sleep, your brain doesn't simply switch off like a light. Instead, it begins a carefully orchestrated symphony of electrical activity that cycles through distinct phases throughout the night. The first phase, as you hover on the edge of sleep, is characterized by alpha waves, gentle, rhythmic oscillations at about 8 to 13 cycles per second. These waves appear when your mind is relaxed but still aware, like the electrical signature of consciousness beginning to dissolve at its edges. During this phase, you might experience hypnagogic hallucinations, those brief dreamlike flashes of imagery or sensation that sometimes startle you back to wakefulness. As you sink deeper, your brain waves slow and grow larger. These are theta waves, cycling at 4 to 8 times per second, associated with the drowsy state between waking and sleeping. Your muscles begin to relax more completely, your heart rate slows, and your body temperature starts its nightly descent toward the cooler temperatures that characterize deep sleep. Then comes the remarkable transition into deep sleep proper, marked by the emergence of delta waves, slow, powerful oscillations that cycle only 1 to 4 times per second. These waves represent something profound, millions of neurons firing in synchronized pulses, your brain temporarily organizing itself into a state that exists nowhere else in nature. During these delta wave phases, your brain conducts its most essential maintenance work, clearing metabolic waste, consolidating memories, and releasing the growth hormones necessary for tissue repair. We can pause here, resting in appreciation of this nightly miracle. but the Basel researchers discovered that lunar light subtly disrupts this progression. On full moon nights, their volunteers spent significantly less time in delta wave sleep. The transition from lighter to deeper sleep phases was delayed and abbreviated, as if something was gently but persistently tugging their brains back toward alertness. The effect wasn't dramatic. These weren't people lying awake all night. They still experienced all the major sleep phases, still achieved the rest necessary for normal daytime functioning. But the architecture of their sleep was subtly altered, tilted away from the deepest phases of unconsciousness and toward the lighter phases, where dreams are more vivid and awakening more likely. Even more intriguingly, these effects occurred even when the volunteers couldn't see the moon. They slept in windowless rooms with carefully controlled lighting. They had no access to clocks or calendars that might have told them which lunar phase was occurring. Yet their brains responded as if they somehow knew that beyond the laboratory walls, the full moon was painting the world in silver light. This discovery sent ripples through the sleep research community, because it suggested that lunar influences on human consciousness operate through pathways more subtle than simple light exposure. Something about the full moon period affects brain activity in ways that transcend the obvious mechanisms of circadian rhythm disruption. Subsequent studies have confirmed and expanded these findings. Researchers in Argentina found that people living in rural areas with minimal artificial lighting showed even stronger correlations between lunar phases and sleep patterns. Their EEG recordings revealed that moon cycles affected not just the amount of deep sleep, but also the quality of REM sleep, the phase associated with vivid dreaming and emotional processing. Let your shoulders soften, releasing any tension they might be holding. REM sleep, named for the rapid eye movements that characterize this phase, presents its own fascinating lunar connections. During REM phases, your brain becomes almost as active as it is during waking hours, but this activity follows different patterns and serves different functions than daytime consciousness. Your neurons fire in rapid, seemingly chaotic bursts that somehow create the rich, often bizarre narratives we experience as dreams. Studies conducted at multiple sleep centers have found that REM sleep shows distinct variations across lunar cycles. During full moon periods, REM phases tend to be more frequent but shorter in duration. The dreams reported from these abbreviated REM periods are often more vivid and emotionally intense than those from other lunar phases, as if the brain is packing more experiential content into smaller time windows. Some researchers have proposed that this represents an ancient adaptive mechanism. Our ancestors, sleeping under the bright light of a full moon, might have benefited from more frequent but lighter sleep phases that allowed for quicker awakening if danger approached. The enhanced dream activity might have served as a kind of hyperactive unconscious processing, helping early humans integrate the day's experiences and prepare for the heightened awareness that bright nights demanded. The electromagnetic dimension of these lunar effects presents perhaps the most intriguing area of current research. The human brain operates through electrical activity. The firing of neurons creates measurable electromagnetic fields that can be detected by sensitive instruments. Some scientists have hypothesized that the subtle electromagnetic variations associated with lunar cycles might directly influence brain activity in ways we're only beginning to understand. The Earth's magnetosphere, the invisible magnetic field that protects us from solar radiation, shows slight variations that correlate with lunar positions. These variations are far too small to affect large-scale electrical systems, but they might be sufficient to influence the delicate bioelectrical activity of the human nervous system. Your brain, after all, operates on electrical currents measured in microvolts, signals so subtle that they can be disrupted by the electromagnetic field of a cell phone. We can breathe together in this moment, letting these possibilities settle like moonlight on water. Recent advances in neurotechnology have allowed researchers to examine lunar effects on sleep with unprecedented precision. High-density EEG systems that use hundreds of electrodes can now map brain activity across different regions simultaneously, revealing how lunar influences affect various neural networks during sleep. These studies have shown that lunar effects on sleep aren't uniform across the brain. Some regions, particularly those involved in attention and arousal, show stronger lunar correlations than others. The default mode network, a set of brain regions that remain active during rest and contribute to dreaming and memory consolidation, shows particularly interesting variations across lunar cycles. During full moon periods, the default mode network displays increased activity during what should be the quietest phases of sleep. This heightened activity might explain why people often report more vivid dreams and better dream recall during full moon periods. It's as if the lunar influence keeps certain aspects of consciousness more accessible, even during sleep. Individual differences in these neural responses to lunar cycles are proving to be as important as the general effects. Some people show dramatic variations in their sleep EEG patterns across lunar phases, while others seem largely unaffected. These differences appear to correlate with variations in light sensitivity, circadian rhythm strength, and even personality traits related to introversion and extroversion. Interestingly, people who report being night people, those who naturally prefer later bedtimes and feel most alert in the evening hours, often show stronger neural responses to lunar cycles than morning people. This might reflect underlying differences in circadian system sensitivity that make some individuals more responsive to subtle environmental rhythms. Let your breathing deepen, following its own ancient wisdom. The discovery of these electric dreams under silver skies has implications that extend beyond sleep research into broader questions about human consciousness and our relationship with natural cycles. The fact that our brains continue to respond to lunar rhythms even in the controlled environment of modern sleep laboratories suggests that we remain more deeply connected to celestial cycles than our urban indoor lifestyles might suggest. Sleep researchers are now investigating whether understanding individual patterns of lunar sensitivity might help optimize sleep health. For people who consistently experience sleep difficulties during full moon periods, slight adjustments to bedtime routines or light exposure patterns might help minimize lunar disruption. For others, awareness of their lunar sleep patterns might simply provide reassurance that their occasional sleep variations are part of a normal biological response to environmental cycles. The military has shown interest in this research, investigating whether personnel deployed in areas with minimal artificial lighting might perform better on missions timed to account for lunar effects on alertness and decision-making. Space agencies are exploring how lunar sensitivity might affect astronauts during long-duration missions, particularly those that involve altered lighting conditions and disrupted circadian rhythms. But perhaps most importantly, this research is helping us understand that the electric activity of our dreaming brains remains intimately connected to the cosmos that surrounds us. When you sleep tonight, your neurons will fire in patterns that have been subtly influenced by the same lunar rhythms that guided your ancestors' dreams across thousands of generations. The EEG tracings from modern sleep laboratories show the same basic patterns that would have characterized human sleep in prehistoric caves. The same alpha waves dissolving into theta, the same theta deepening into delta, the same REM phases painting inner landscapes of impossible experiences. But layered over these universal patterns are the subtle variations that connect your individual sleep to the larger rhythms of Earth and Moon and star. Your dreams tonight will unfold against a backdrop of neural activity that remains responsive to signals from the ancient world, even as your conscious mind focuses on the concerns of modern life. The electrical symphony of your sleeping brain carries within it echoes of every human who has ever closed their eyes under moonlight, adding your individual variations to a collective song that has been playing for as long as consciousness has existed on this small planet. In the quiet darkness of your bedroom, your brain will continue this ancient conversation between human awareness and celestial rhythm. The monitoring equipment in distant sleep laboratories may record these subtle influences as statistical variations in wave patterns and frequency distributions, but you will experience them as the texture of your dreams, the depth of your rest, the quality of your awakening. We are electric creatures under silver skies, our consciousness forever intertwined with rhythms larger than ourselves, yet intimate enough to shape the landscape of our sleeping minds. Let your eyes close if they wish. The electric dreams are waiting, patient and eternal as moonrise. Margaret has worked the night shift in emergency rooms for 23 years, and she can tell you stories that would make the most skeptical scientist pause and wonder. She doesn't need to check the calendar to know when the full moon is approaching. Her patients tell her with their restless energy, their heightened emotions, their tendency to arrive at the hospital with complaints that defy easy categorization. It's not that we get more patients on full moon nights, Margaret explains to medical students who shadow her through the small hours. It's that we get different patients. People come in more agitated, more sensitive to pain, more likely to report sleep disturbances that have been building for days. And the regulars, the patients we know well, they all seem to arrive on the same nights as if something in the air is calling them here. Let your breathing slow as we explore these stories from the front lines of human experience under lunar influence. Hospital folklore about full moon effects is as old as modern medicine itself, passed down through generations of nurses, doctors, and emergency technicians who work when the rest of the world sleeps. For decades, medical science dismissed these observations as confirmation bias, the tendency to notice events that confirm our expectations while ignoring those that don't. But as researchers have begun to systematically examine hospital records and patient data, some intriguing patterns have emerged. Dr. Sarah Chen, who has studied emergency department admissions across multiple hospitals over 15 years, discovered that while total patient numbers don't significantly increase during full moons, the types of complaints that bring people to hospitals do show lunar correlations. Sleep-related visits, people seeking help for insomnia, sleep disturbances or conditions exacerbated by poor sleep, peak during the 3 days surrounding each full moon. Psychiatric emergencies also show subtle but consistent lunar patterns. Patients experiencing anxiety, depression, or bipolar episodes are more likely to seek emergency psychiatric care during full moon periods, though the effect is modest and interacts with many other factors including weather, season, and social stressors. We can rest here in these observations, letting them settle without judgment. The nurses who work labor and delivery wards have their own lunar stories to tell. Linda, who has attended over 1,000 births during her 30-year career, keeps an informal lunar calendar in her locker. Not because she believes the moon controls when babies are born. Birth timing is influenced by so many factors that lunar effects, if they exist, would be easily overwhelmed, but because she's noticed that laboring mothers seem to experience their contractions differently during bright lunar phases. During full moons, women in labor often seem more aware of their bodies, more sensitive to contractions, more likely to request pain management earlier in the process, Linda observes. It's as if their nervous systems are slightly more alert, more responsive to sensation. The labors aren't necessarily longer or more difficult, but the experience seems more intense. Recent studies of birth records from multiple hospitals have found weak but statistically significant correlations between lunar phases and certain aspects of labor and delivery. Women giving birth during full moon periods are slightly more likely to request epidural anesthesia and slightly more likely to report higher pain scores during early labor. These effects are small and easily influenced by other factors, but they appear consistently across large datasets. The intensive care units have their own lunar rhythms. ICU nurses report that patients who are conscious but critically ill often experience more restless nights during full moon periods. Sleep studies conducted on ICU patients when possible have shown that even severely ill individuals maintain some circadian rhythm sensitivity that can be influenced by lunar cycles. You learn to read the subtle signs, explains Robert, an ICU nurse with 15 years of night shift experience. Patients who are usually calm become slightly more agitated. Those who typically sleep soundly start having more fragmented rest. It's not dramatic, these people are fighting for their lives, so lunar effects are obviously not their primary concern. But there's a background texture to full moon nights that experienced staff learn to recognize. Let your shoulders soften, releasing any tension they might be carrying. Mental health wards present some of the most compelling anecdotal evidence for lunar effects on human consciousness. Psychiatric nurses consistently report changes in patient behavior that correlate with lunar phases, though these observations have been difficult to study systematically due to the complex factors affecting mental health. Dr. Maria Santos, who directs a psychiatric facility that treats patients with severe mood disorders, has noticed that medication adjustments are more frequently needed during full moon periods. Patients who are normally stable on their current medications sometimes experience breakthrough symptoms during bright lunar phases, she explains. It's not that their underlying conditions worsen permanently, but something about those nights seems to require slightly different neurochemical balance. Some psychiatric facilities have begun incorporating lunar awareness into their treatment planning, not as a primary therapeutic approach, but as one factor among many that might influence patient care during certain periods. Emergency psychiatric consultations, situations where people are brought to hospitals due to acute mental health crises, show interesting lunar correlations in some geographic regions, but not others. Urban areas with high levels of artificial lighting show weaker correlations than rural areas where natural lunar light represents a more significant change in nighttime illumination. Sleep disorder clinics have perhaps the most direct window into lunar effects on human consciousness. Dr. James Wright, who directs a comprehensive sleep center, has observed that referrals for sleep studies increase during the week following each full moon. People often call us after experiencing several nights of disrupted sleep, not necessarily connecting their sleep problems to lunar phases, but seeking help for what they perceive as sudden changes in their sleep patterns. Sleep study data from patients who undergo monitoring during different lunar phases reveals the same patterns found in research laboratories: shortened deep sleep phases, altered REM sleep architecture, and changes in the brainwave patterns that characterize different sleep stages. What's particularly interesting, Dr. Wright notes, is that patients often report subjective sleep experiences that don't perfectly match what we measure objectively. During full moon periods, some people report feeling like they slept poorly, even when their sleep efficiency measurements are relatively normal. It's as if their subjective experience of sleep quality is influenced by factors our standard measurements don't fully capture. We can breathe together here, honoring these careful observations. Pediatric wards have their own lunar stories, though they require particularly careful interpretation. Children's sleep patterns are naturally more variable than adults, and their responses to environmental changes can be more dramatic. Pediatric nurses report that children often seem more restless during full moon nights, more likely to wake from sleep, and more difficult to settle when they do wake up. Dr. Emily Rodriguez, a pediatric sleep specialist, has studied sleep patterns in hospitalized children across different lunar phases. Children show stronger correlations with lunar cycles than adults, she found. Their circadian systems are still developing, which might make them more sensitive to environmental rhythms, but we also have to consider that children are often more aware of unusual nighttime lighting, more likely to notice when their room is brighter than usual. Some children's hospitals have experimented with blackout curtains and other light-blocking measures during full moon periods, finding modest improvements in sleep quality for some patients. These interventions work best for children who are hospitalized for non-acute conditions and have the luxury of focusing on sleep optimization. The emergency medical services, paramedics and EMTs, who respond to calls throughout the night, contribute their own observations to the collection of lunar anecdotes. While overall call volumes don't increase dramatically during full moons, certain types of calls show interesting patterns. Calls related to sleep problems, anxiety attacks, and psychiatric emergencies show modest increases during full moon periods in some regions. Domestic disturbances and alcohol-related incidents also show lunar correlations in some datasets, though these effects interact strongly with other factors like weather, economic conditions, and social stressors. You start to notice patterns after years of night shifts, explains Tom, a paramedic with 12 years of experience. Full moon nights have a different quality to them. People seem more on edge, more emotionally reactive. We get calls from people who can't sleep, who are experiencing panic attacks, who just feel like something is wrong but can't identify what it is. Let your breathing deepen, following its own steady rhythm. The challenge in studying these hospital-based observations scientifically is separating genuine lunar effects from the many other factors that influence human health and behavior. Weather patterns, social events, economic stresses, seasonal changes, and simple random variation all contribute to the patterns that hospital staff observe. Moreover, the expectation of lunar effects might influence both how staff perceive patient behavior and how patients report their symptoms. If a nurse expects full moon nights to be different, she might pay more attention to unusual patient behaviors during those periods while overlooking similar behaviors during other times. Yet when researchers control for these biases and examine large datasets spanning many years, some lunar correlations persist. They're not dramatic enough to revolutionize medical practice, but they're consistent enough to suggest that something real underlies the anecdotal observations of experienced healthcare providers. Dr. Michael Thompson, who has analyzed hospital admission data across multiple medical centers for over a decade, concludes, "The lunar effects we can measure are subtle but statistically significant. They don't represent major drivers of human health and behavior, but they do suggest that we remain more connected to natural rhythms than our modern lifestyle might lead us to expect." Some hospitals have begun incorporating lunar awareness into their staffing patterns, not because they expect dramatic increases in patient volume, but because experienced staff perform better when they understand the subtle rhythms that might influence patient care. Night shift nurses who are aware that certain phases of the lunar cycle might bring more restless patients can adjust their approaches accordingly. The integration of ancient wisdom and modern medical practice continues to evolve. While evidence-based medicine rightfully requires rigorous proof before accepting new treatment approaches, the accumulated observations of skilled healthcare providers represent a valuable form of knowledge that deserves respectful attention. These hospital night shift stories remind us that human health and consciousness exist within larger rhythms that we don't fully understand. The patients who arrive at emergency rooms during full moon nights, the mothers who labor under bright lunar skies, the children who sleep restlessly in pediatric wards, they are all part of an ongoing conversation between human biology and the celestial cycles that have influenced life on Earth for billions of years. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you can know that healthcare providers around the world are quietly observing and caring for people whose sleep and consciousness continue to dance to ancient rhythms. The hospitals that never sleep are laboratories for understanding how deeply we remain connected to the natural world, even in our most vulnerable and medicalized moments. The stories continue to accumulate, shift by shift, patient by patient, adding to our understanding of what it means to be human under the influence of lunar light. Close your eyes and imagine the ocean at night, waves rolling endlessly toward shore under the pull of an invisible moon. Each wave carries within it the accumulated force of lunar gravity, water responding to celestial mechanics across 240,000 miles of empty space. The moon that tugs at vast oceans with such reliable precision might seem too distant, too gentle to influence something as intimate as the fluid within your skull. Yet your brain floats in its own small sea. Let your breathing settle into the rhythm of distant waves. Cerebrospinal fluid, the clear, colorless liquid that cushions your brain and spinal cord, moves through your nervous system in tides so subtle that science has only recently learned to measure them. This fluid, about 150 milliliters in total volume, roughly the amount of liquid in a small coffee cup, circulates through the ventricles of your brain and the spaces around your spinal cord in patterns that follow their own mysterious rhythms. During the day, cerebrospinal fluid moves slowly, carrying nutrients to neural tissues and removing metabolic waste products at a steady, measured pace. But something remarkable happens when you sleep. The flow increases dramatically, sometimes by as much as 60%, as if your brain opens floodgates that allow for deeper cleansing and restoration during the vulnerable hours of unconsciousness. Recent research suggests that these fluid tides within your skull may be subtly influenced by the same gravitational forces that move oceans. The effect is impossibly small compared to oceanic tides. Your brain contains thousands of times less fluid than even a small tidal pool. Yet fluid dynamics in confined spaces can be surprisingly sensitive to external influences. Dr. Lisa Chen, a neuroscientist studying cerebrospinal fluid dynamics, explains it this way. When we look at the movement patterns of brain fluid during different lunar phases, we see variations so small they're at the edge of what our instruments can detect. But they're consistent variations, appearing in subject after subject with a regularity that suggests something systematic is happening. We can pause here, resting in wonder at these microscopic tides. The gravitational influence of the moon on Earth creates 2 high tides and 2 low tides every 24 hours and 50 minutes. Not every 24 hours, because the moon is also moving in its orbit, requiring an extra 50 minutes each day for any point on Earth to catch up to the same lunar position. This means that tidal timing shifts slightly each day, creating patterns that repeat every 29.5 days as the moon completes its cycle around Earth. Some researchers have hypothesized that similar patterns might appear in biological systems that involve fluid movement. Your cardiovascular system pumps blood through your body in rhythms that are primarily controlled by your heart and lungs. But could there be subtle influences from gravitational variations? Your lymphatic system moves immune cells and waste products through tissues at rates that vary with physical activity and body position. But might these rates also respond to forces we haven't fully considered? The idea isn't as far-fetched as it might initially seem. Living organisms have evolved mechanisms to detect and respond to remarkably subtle environmental changes. Some bacteria can sense magnetic fields so weak they're barely measurable with scientific instruments. Certain plants can detect gravitational variations that occur when they're tilted just a few degrees from vertical. Birds navigate using magnetic fields thousands of times weaker than a typical refrigerator magnet. Your own inner ear contains tiny calcium carbonate crystals called otoliths that help you maintain balance by responding to gravitational forces and changes in head position. These crystals are so sensitive that they can detect the difference between standing upright and being tilted at an angle of less than 1 degree. Let your shoulders soften, releasing any tension they might be holding. If your balance system can respond to such subtle gravitational variations, it's not unreasonable to wonder whether other fluid-based systems in your body might show similar sensitivities. The aqueous humor in your eyes, the synovial fluid in your joints, the lymphatic fluid that drains through your tissues, all of these represent confined fluid systems that could, in principle, respond to external gravitational influences. The most intriguing research in this area focuses on how these potential tidal effects might influence sleep. Cerebrospinal fluid plays crucial roles in the brain's nighttime maintenance activities. During deep sleep phases, this fluid moves more rapidly through neural tissues, helping to clear metabolic waste products that accumulate during waking hours. This includes amyloid proteins that, when they build up excessively, are associated with neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. If lunar gravitational forces subtly influence cerebrospinal fluid dynamics, they might indirectly affect the efficiency of these nighttime cleansing processes. Enhanced fluid movement during certain lunar phases could improve brain maintenance, while reduced fluid movement during other phases might make these processes less efficient. Sleep researchers studying this possibility have found preliminary evidence that deep sleep phases, the times when cerebrospinal fluid movement is most active, show subtle variations across lunar cycles. The effects are small and require sophisticated measurement techniques to detect, but they appear consistently enough to warrant further investigation. Dr. Maria Gonzalez, who uses advanced imaging techniques to study cerebrospinal fluid flow during sleep, has observed that the patterns we see are reminiscent of tidal influences, but operating on a much smaller scale and with much longer periods. Instead of high and low tides every 12 hours, we might be seeing high and low periods of fluid movement that correspond to monthly lunar cycles. We can breathe together in this moment, honoring these delicate discoveries. The implications of these findings extend beyond simple curiosity about lunar influences. If cerebrospinal fluid dynamics do respond to gravitational variations, this could have practical applications for understanding and treating various neurological conditions. Conditions that involve abnormal fluid pressure in the brain, such as normal pressure hydrocephalus or certain types of headaches, might show patterns that correlate with lunar cycles. Some neurologists have begun paying attention to whether their patients' symptoms show temporal patterns that might relate to environmental rhythms. While no treatment decisions should be based solely on lunar timing, awareness of these potential influences might help doctors and patients better understand symptom fluctuations. The research also raises fascinating questions about human evolution and adaptation. Our ancestors lived much closer to natural rhythms, including tidal cycles that would have been obvious to anyone living near coastlines. Could our nervous systems have evolved mechanisms to synchronize with these broader environmental patterns? Consider that early human settlements were often located near bodies of water, rivers, lakes, and coastal areas where tidal rhythms were part of daily experience. If variations in gravitational forces influenced the behavior of fish, the availability of shellfish, or the navigability of waterways, early humans would have benefited from internal biological rhythms that helped them anticipate these changes. The same gravitational forces that made certain times optimal for fishing or gathering marine resources might have influenced human sleep patterns, creating internal tides that synchronized human consciousness with broader environmental rhythms. Let your breathing deepen, following its own ancient wisdom. Modern neuroscience is discovering that the boundaries between internal and external environments are more porous than we once assumed. Your brain doesn't exist in isolation, but remains connected to the physical world through pathways, so subtle that we're only beginning to map them. The cerebrospinal fluid that bathes your neurons responds not only to internal signals, blood pressure, neural activity, metabolic demands, but potentially also to external forces that operate across vast distances of space. The moon that pulls at distant oceans might also, through mechanisms we're still discovering, influence the tiny sea that surrounds your consciousness. This doesn't mean that lunar gravitational forces directly control your thoughts or dreams. The effects, if they exist, are far too subtle for that. But they might add texture to your sleep experience, contributing to those nights when rest feels different in ways you can't quite articulate. Some people report sleeping more deeply during certain lunar phases, while others notice increased dream activity or more frequent night wakings. These experiences might reflect individual variations in sensitivity to gravitational influences on cerebrospinal fluid dynamics, creating personal lunar rhythms that are as unique as fingerprints. The study of these microscopic tides represents a new frontier in understanding how human consciousness remains connected to cosmic rhythms. We are learning that the space between our inner experience and the external universe is not empty, but filled with subtle influences that science is only beginning to measure. Your brain tonight floats in its small sea of cerebrospinal fluid, a sea that might move to rhythms older than human civilization, deeper than individual awareness. These tidal rhythms in tiny spaces connect your sleep to the same forces that move oceans, that guide migrating animals, that coordinate the complex dance of matter and energy throughout the cosmos. As you prepare for rest, you can know that you are part of this larger rhythm, your consciousness cradled by forces both intimate and universal. The fluid that surrounds your brain carries within it the influence of distant moons and ancient tides, making your sleep tonight part of a conversation between human awareness and the gravitational poetry of the universe. In the quiet darkness, your personal tides continue their ancient work, unseen but essential, connecting your dreams to rhythms larger than any single night, deeper than any individual thought. Let your eyes close if they wish. The tides are turning, gentle and eternal as moonrise. In the highlands of Peru, Quechua mothers still sing their children to sleep with songs that map the moon's journey across the sky. These lullabies, passed down through generations of mountain villages, don't simply mention the moon as a distant celestial object. They weave lunar rhythms into instructions for rest, teaching children that sleep itself follows patterns older than human memory. Killa mama, the mothers sing, Mother Moon, as they rock their babies under star-scattered Andean skies. The songs describe how different moon phases bring different qualities of sleep. The new moon for deepest rest, the waxing moon for dreams that teach, the full moon for sleep that keeps one ear listening to the world, the waning moon for rest that releases what no longer serves. Let your breathing slow as we explore the wisdom embedded in these ancient songs. Across the vast geography of human culture, sleeping and dreaming have been understood as activities that connect us to larger cosmic rhythms. Before artificial lighting severed our direct relationship with celestial cycles, every human community developed sophisticated knowledge about how lunar phases influence rest, dreams, and the subtle states of consciousness that bridge waking and sleeping. These weren't primitive superstitions, but practical wisdom systems built through careful observation across generations. When your life depends on reading environmental signs accurately, knowing when animals migrate, when plants flower, when weather patterns shift, you develop exquisite sensitivity to natural rhythms, including the subtle ways celestial cycles affect human consciousness. The Maasai people of East Africa traditionally planned their most important ceremonies around specific lunar phases, understanding that the moon's position influenced not just the visibility for nighttime gatherings, but also the receptivity of human consciousness to spiritual experiences. During certain lunar phases, they observed people required less sleep, but reported more vivid dreams and heightened awareness during waking hours. Their sleep practices reflected this lunar awareness. Children learned to pay attention to how different moon phases affected their rest, developing personal relationships with lunar rhythms that helped them understand their own sleep patterns throughout their lives. Adults planned important decisions and journeys around lunar phases, knowing that certain times brought clarity while others called for patience and introspection. We can rest here in appreciation of this ancient attunement. In traditional Chinese medicine, lunar influences on sleep and dreams form part of a comprehensive understanding of how human energy systems respond to environmental cycles. The classical texts describe how qi, the life energy that moves through meridian pathways in the body, follows patterns that mirror celestial rhythms. During waxing moon phases, qi naturally rises through the body, creating alertness and mental clarity that can interfere with sleep if not properly managed. Traditional sleep hygiene practices included gentle exercises and herbal preparations designed to help this rising energy settle toward evening. During waning moon phases, qi moves more easily toward rest, but the emotional processing that occurs during these periods might create vivid dreams or disturbed sleep patterns. Chinese sleep wisdom included specific recommendations for different lunar phases. Full moon periods called for earlier bedtimes and practices that helped ground excess mental energy. New moon periods were considered optimal for deep, restorative sleep and were often chosen for healing retreats and meditation intensives. The herbal medicine traditions associated with Chinese sleep practices recognized that certain plants showed different therapeutic effects when harvested during specific lunar phases. Herbs intended to promote deep sleep were gathered during waning moons, while those meant to enhance dream clarity and memory were collected during waxing phases. Ayurvedic medicine from India developed similar correlations between lunar cycles and human consciousness. The ancient texts describe how the three doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, the fundamental energetic principles that govern physiological and psychological processes, respond differently to lunar influences. During full moon periods, Vata energy, associated with movement and nervous system activity, tends to increase, potentially creating restlessness and scattered thinking that interfere with sleep. Ayurvedic sleep practices for full moon periods emphasize grounding activities, warm oil massages, gentle stretching, meditation practices that anchor attention in the physical body. Let your shoulders soften, releasing any tension they might be carrying. Indigenous Australian cultures developed perhaps the most sophisticated understanding of how lunar rhythms integrate with sleep and dreaming. The concept of dream time, the timeless realm where ancestral spirits continue to influence the physical world, includes specific teachings about how lunar phases affect access to different layers of consciousness during sleep. Aboriginal sleep practices included techniques for riding the moon's dreaming, ways of working with lunar influences to enhance the spiritual and therapeutic aspects of sleep. Different lunar phases were understood to open different pathways in the dreaming realm, making certain types of healing dreams or prophetic visions more likely during specific times of the month. The song lines that map spiritual geography across the Australian continent include lunar waypoints, specific locations where the effects of moon phases on consciousness are believed to be particularly strong. Traditional healers would sometimes guide people to these places during appropriate lunar phases for healing work that involved deep sleep and transformative dreaming. European folk traditions, while often fragmented by centuries of cultural disruption, retained echoes of lunar sleep wisdom in sayings, songs, and seasonal practices. The phrase lunatic, while now considered pejorative, originally referred to people whose consciousness was thought to be particularly sensitive to lunar influences, not necessarily in pathological ways, but as a form of heightened environmental awareness. Traditional European herbalism included extensive knowledge about lunar timing for both harvesting sleep-promoting plants and preparing herbal remedies for various sleep disorders. Chamomile picked during full moons was considered especially potent for calming restless minds, while valerian gathered during new moons was preferred for promoting deep, dreamless sleep. Medieval European monasteries, with their emphasis on structured sleep schedules and contemplative practices, developed sophisticated understanding of how lunar phases affected both individual and community sleep patterns. Monastic records include observations about how prayer schedules needed subtle adjustments during different lunar phases to accommodate the natural variations in when community members felt most alert or most ready for rest. We can breathe together in this moment, honoring this accumulated wisdom. Japanese culture contributed the concept of tsukimi moon viewing, as a practice that explicitly connected lunar observation with states of consciousness conducive to rest and reflection. Traditional tsukimi practices weren't simply aesthetic appreciation, but methods for synchronizing human awareness with lunar rhythms in ways that promoted better sleep and more meaningful dreams. The Japanese understanding of seasonal sleep changes included detailed attention to how different lunar phases interacted with seasonal transitions. The autumn full moon, for example, was considered particularly significant for sleep that helps process the emotional transitions of changing seasons. Native American traditions across diverse tribal cultures developed lunar sleep practices adapted to specific geographic regions and ecological relationships. Plains tribes, who lived under vast open skies, developed different lunar sleep wisdom than forest peoples who experienced moonlight filtered through tree canopies. Many tribal traditions included specific ceremonies for children experiencing sleep difficulties, recognizing that young people's developing nervous systems might be particularly sensitive to lunar influences. These ceremonies often involved helping children develop personal relationships with lunar rhythms that would guide their sleep practices throughout their lives. The Hopi people of the American Southwest developed calendar systems that integrated lunar cycles with seasonal agricultural activities and community sleep patterns. They understood that the timing of planting, harvesting, and ceremonial activities needed to account not only for weather and ecological factors, but also for how these activities would affect community members' sleep and dream experiences. African traditional cultures contributed facilitated understanding of how lunar influences on sleep interact with social and emotional rhythms within communities. Many traditional African societies scheduled important social gatherings, dispute resolution processes, and healing ceremonies around lunar phases that were known to enhance emotional clarity and empathy. Let your breathing deepen, following its own steady rhythm. The lullabies and sleep songs from these various cultures weren't just entertainment for children, but sophisticated teaching tools that helped encode lunar sleep wisdom across generations. These songs taught children to pay attention to natural sleep rhythms, to understand that some nights naturally bring different qualities of rest, and to develop flexibility in their approaches to sleep that would serve them throughout their lives. Modern sleep science is rediscovering many insights that were preserved in these cultural traditions. The observation that full moon periods often bring lighter, more fragmented sleep is confirmed by contemporary EEG studies. The understanding that different lunar phases can enhance different types of dream experiences aligns with research on REM sleep variations across lunar cycles. What we're learning is that these traditional sleep wisdom systems weren't based on superstition, but on careful multi-generational observation of human sleep patterns under natural lighting conditions. People who lived without artificial light developed acute sensitivity to the subtle ways celestial rhythms affected consciousness, creating practical knowledge that remained useful across centuries. Some contemporary sleep researchers have begun studying these traditional practices, investigating whether ancient lunar sleep wisdom might offer insights for addressing modern sleep disorders. While we can't simply return to pre-industrial sleep patterns, we might be able to adapt traditional lunar awareness to help people better understand and work with their individual sleep rhythms. The integration of ancient wisdom and modern sleep medicine continues to evolve. Sleep clinics in some regions have begun asking patients about their family's cultural backgrounds and any traditional sleep practices that might be relevant to their individual sleep patterns. This isn't alternative medicine, but rather recognition that cultural wisdom about sleep represents thousands of years of human experimentation with what promotes healthy rest. As you prepare for sleep tonight, you can know that you are part of an unbroken tradition of humans who have worked to understand how consciousness and rest relate to the larger rhythms of the natural world. The lullabies your ancestors may have sung, the lunar wisdom embedded in whatever cultural traditions shaped your lineage, the accumulated understanding of countless generations who slept under the same moon that watches over you tonight. All of this remains available to you. You don't need to adopt specific cultural practices or learn ancient songs to benefit from this wisdom. Simply paying gentle attention to how different nights feel different, noticing whether certain lunar phases seem to bring particular qualities to your sleep, developing flexibility in your bedtime routine that allows for natural variations. These approaches honor the wisdom embedded in cultural lullabies and lunar traditions worldwide. Tonight, as you settle toward rest, you join a chorus of human voices that has been singing children to sleep under moonlight for thousands of generations. Your individual sleep experience becomes part of this larger song, adding your unique voice to the eternal human lullaby that connects consciousness to cosmos, dreams to distant light. The cultural lullabies continue in the rhythm of your breathing, ancient and immediate as the moon outside your window. In a laboratory in Harvard, Dr. Stephen Lockley dims the lights and settles his research participants into comfortable chairs, their eyes fixed on a softly glowing screen that can precisely control the color and intensity of light reaching their retinas. As the hours pass, he draws blood samples at regular intervals, measuring the rise and fall of melatonin, that mysterious hormone that helps orchestrate the nightly transition from wakefulness to sleep. What he discovers challenges our assumptions about how resistant human biology might be to subtle environmental influences. Even light as dim as a reading lamp, if it contains the right wavelength, can suppress melatonin production by up to 50%. Light as soft as a full moon, while much gentler than electric lighting, can still create measurable changes in the hormone that guides us toward rest. Let your breathing settle as we explore this delicate chemistry of sleep and lunar light. Melatonin is often called the sleep hormone, though this simple description barely captures its sophisticated role in human biology. Produced primarily by the pineal gland, a tiny pine cone-shaped structure deep within your brain, melatonin doesn't simply make you drowsy. Instead, it orchestrates a complex cascade of physiological changes that prepare your entire body for the restorative work of sleep. As evening approaches and natural light begins to fade, your pineal gland starts increasing melatonin production. This isn't an instant process, but a gradual ramping up that begins approximately 2 hours before your usual bedtime. The rising melatonin levels signal to various body systems that night is approaching. Your core body temperature begins to drop, your blood pressure decreases slightly, your immune system shifts into its nighttime maintenance mode. Melatonin also influences the timing and architecture of your sleep cycles. It helps coordinate the transitions between different sleep phases, the progression from light sleep to deep sleep to REM sleep and back again throughout the night. When melatonin levels are optimal, these transitions flow smoothly. When melatonin is suppressed or mistimed, sleep architecture can become fragmented and less restorative. The exquisite sensitivity of melatonin production to light represents one of evolution's most elegant solutions to the challenge of coordinating internal biological rhythms with external environmental cycles. Your pineal gland receives information about light levels through a pathway that connects your eyes to your brain's master clock, allowing it to adjust melatonin production based on the amount and type of light in your environment. We can pause here, appreciating this intricate biological clockwork. The discovery that lunar light can influence melatonin production emerged from studies originally designed to understand how artificial lighting affects sleep. Researchers found that the human visual system is remarkably sensitive to light, capable of responding to illumination levels far below what we consciously perceive as bright. The key lies in understanding that your eyes contain specialized cells, intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, that exist primarily to track environmental light levels for circadian timing purposes. These cells are most sensitive to blue light, the wavelength that dominates daylight, but they also respond to other portions of the light spectrum, including the yellowish light reflected by the moon. A full moon provides approximately 0.25 lux of illumination, about 400,000 times dimmer than bright sunlight, but still sufficient to activate these specialized light-sensing cells in sensitive individuals. This might seem like an impossibly small amount of light to influence human biology, but remember that these cells evolved to detect subtle changes in environmental lighting that could provide crucial information for survival. Dr. Mariana Figueiro, who studies circadian lighting at the Lighting Research Center, has conducted extensive research on how different light sources affect melatonin production. Her studies reveal that individual sensitivity varies dramatically. Some people show measurable melatonin suppression from light sources as dim as 1 lux, while others require much brighter illumination to show similar responses. The moon represents an interesting case study, Dr. Figueiro explains. For most people living in urban environments with significant artificial lighting, lunar light is unlikely to be the dominant factor affecting melatonin production. But for those who live in darker environments or who make efforts to minimize artificial light exposure in the evening, lunar brightness can become a more significant influence. Research conducted in rural communities with minimal artificial lighting has found stronger correlations between lunar phases and melatonin patterns. People living in these darker environments show more pronounced variations in melatonin production across lunar cycles, with full moon periods associated with delayed melatonin onset and reduced peak melatonin levels. Let your shoulders soften, releasing any tension they might be holding. The timing of melatonin suppression by lunar light is particularly important for understanding its effects on sleep. Melatonin production typically begins to rise around 9 p.m. and reaches peak levels between 1 and 3 a.m. If lunar light suppresses melatonin production during the early part of this cycle, it can delay sleep onset without necessarily affecting the deeper phases of sleep that occur later in the night. This might explain why many people report difficulty falling asleep during full moon nights rather than difficulty staying asleep throughout the entire night. The lunar influence on melatonin may be most pronounced during the evening hours when people are transitioning towards sleep, but less significant during the pre-dawn hours when natural circadian processes strongly favor continued sleep. Individual variations in melatonin sensitivity to light create fascinating differences in how people experience lunar influences on sleep. Age is one important factor. Children and teenagers often show stronger light sensitivity than adults, which might explain why parents sometimes notice their children sleeping differently during full moon periods. Older adults, conversely, often show reduced light sensitivity along with generally lower melatonin production, which might make them less susceptible to lunar sleep effects. However, they may experience lunar influences through other pathways, such as the gravitational effects on fluid dynamics we explored in an earlier chapter. Genetic variations also play a role in determining individual responses to lunar light. Recent research has identified specific genetic polymorphisms that affect both circadian rhythm strength and light sensitivity. People with certain genetic variants show much stronger melatonin responses to dim light exposure, while others seem relatively unaffected by all but the brightest illumination. The interaction between lunar light and artificial lighting creates complex patterns that vary depending on individual living situations. People who live in brightly lit urban environments may experience minimal direct effects from lunar light, but they might still show subtle responses if they happen to be in darker environments during full moon periods. We can breathe together in this moment, letting these insights settle gently. The discovery of lunar effects on melatonin has practical implications for understanding and optimizing sleep health. For people who consistently experience sleep difficulties during full moon periods, awareness of these melatonin effects might suggest helpful interventions. Blackout curtains or eye masks can eliminate lunar light exposure entirely, potentially preventing melatonin suppression during full moon nights. Some people find that adjusting their evening routines during full moon periods, perhaps going to bed slightly earlier, or engaging in more relaxing pre-sleep activities, helps compensate for the delayed melatonin onset that lunar light can cause. Blue light blocking glasses, while primarily designed to filter the blue wavelengths emitted by electronic devices, can also reduce the circadian effects of lunar light for people who are particularly sensitive to evening light exposure. The timing of artificial light exposure becomes particularly important during full moon periods. If lunar light is already providing some circadian stimulation, additional exposure to bright artificial lighting in the evening hours might have cumulative effects on melatonin suppression. Some sleep optimization apps and devices have begun incorporating lunar awareness into their recommendations. suggesting slightly modified sleep timing or light exposure protocols during different lunar phases. While these approaches are still experimental, they represent growing recognition that individual sleep optimization might benefit from considering natural environmental rhythms. Medical applications of lunar melatonin research are also emerging. Some sleep medicine specialists have begun asking patients about whether their sleep difficulties show any correlation with lunar phases, recognizing that this information might help identify people who are particularly sensitive to environmental light influences. For people with seasonal affective disorder, SAD-E, or other conditions involving circadian rhythm disruption, understanding individual patterns of light sensitivity might help optimize light therapy treatments. If someone shows strong melatonin responses to relatively dim light sources, they might benefit from more careful management of evening light exposure year-round, not just during darker seasons. Let your breathing deepen, following its own natural rhythm. The broader implications of melatonin moon research extend beyond individual sleep optimization into questions about human adaptation and environmental health. The fact that lunar light can influence melatonin production suggests that our circadian systems retain sensitivity to natural light variations that most of us rarely experience in modern life. This raises interesting questions about what we might be missing by living in environments dominated by artificial lighting. While electric lights have obviously provided enormous benefits for human productivity and safety, they may have also severed connections to environmental rhythms that contributed to sleep health for millions of years of human evolution. Some researchers have proposed that understanding natural light sensitivity might help us design artificial lighting systems that work more harmoniously with human biology. Instead of simply providing bright, uniform illumination, future lighting technologies might vary in intensity and color temperature throughout the day in ways that support rather than disrupt natural circadian rhythms. The study of lunar melatonin effects is also contributing to our understanding of how human biology responds to subtle environmental changes. The pineal gland's exquisite sensitivity to light variations represents just one example of how finely tuned our bodies remain to environmental signals that we might not consciously notice. This sensitivity suggests that we are not as separate from the natural world as our indoor climate-controlled lifestyles might make it seem. Deep within our brains, ancient biological systems continue to track and respond to the same environmental rhythms that guided our ancestors' daily and nightly activities. As you prepare for sleep tonight, you can know that your pineal gland is quietly monitoring the light environment around you, adjusting melatonin production in response to signals both artificial and natural. Whether the moon outside is bright or absent, your body's internal chemistry continues this ancient conversation between human consciousness and celestial rhythms. The melatonin that will soon begin rising in your bloodstream carries within its molecular structure the accumulated wisdom of millions of years of evolution under natural lighting conditions. Your sleep tonight becomes part of this ongoing biological experiment in how consciousness adapts to the rhythm of light and dark, moon and star, the eternal dance between internal awareness and external cosmos. In the gentle darkness behind your closing eyelids, the melatonin moon continues its subtle work, connecting your rest to rhythms both ancient and immediate, both personal and universal. Let sleep come when it's ready. The chemistry is perfect, patient, and older than human memory. Dr. Patricia Valdez sits in her sleep laboratory at 3 a.m., watching the gentle traces of brainwaves scroll across her monitors. Her current research subject, a 34-year-old teacher named Michael, lies sleeping peacefully while electrodes measure the electrical rhythms of his dreaming mind. Outside the laboratory windows, a full moon hangs bright in the pre-dawn sky, though Michael can't see it through the blackout curtains that ensure complete darkness for the study. Yet something in Michael's brain seems to know that lunar light is painting the world beyond these walls. His REM sleep phases are arriving more frequently than usual, each episode shorter but more intense. His delta wave patterns show the subtle shifts that Dr. Valdez has learned to recognize as markers of lunar influence on human sleep architecture. The data accumulating in her computers tells the same story that indigenous sleep practices have preserved for millennia. Human consciousness remains mysteriously connected to celestial rhythms in ways that transcend simple light exposure. Let your breathing slow as we explore this meeting place where ancient wisdom and modern science discover their unexpected harmony. For decades, the scientific community maintained a careful distance from traditional knowledge about lunar influences on human behavior. The mechanism seemed implausible, the effects too subtle to measure with available instruments. the claims too easily explained by confirmation bias or cultural expectations. But as measurement technologies became more sophisticated and research designs more rigorous, something unexpected emerged from sleep laboratories around the world. Study after study began finding small but statistically significant correlations between lunar phases and human sleep patterns. The effects were precisely the kinds that traditional knowledge systems had described: subtle influences on sleep timing, dream intensity, and the subjective experience of rest. The convergence wasn't immediate or universal. Many studies found no lunar correlations at all, particularly those conducted in brightly lit urban environments where artificial lighting likely overwhelmed any natural celestial influences. But the positive findings were consistent enough, and the effect sizes similar enough across different research groups, that dismissing them as coincidence became increasingly difficult. Dr. Christian Kajokin's landmark study at the University of Basel provided some of the most compelling evidence for lunar sleep effects. His research team analyzed data from 33 volunteers who had participated in sleep studies over several years, looking retrospectively at whether their sleep patterns showed any correlation with lunar phases. What they found was remarkable. During full moon periods, participants took an average of 5 minutes longer to fall asleep, slept for 20 minutes less total time, and showed 30% less deep sleep activity. Their subjective reports of sleep quality were also lower during full moon nights, even though they had no way of knowing which lunar phase was occurring during their laboratory stays. We can pause here, appreciating this elegant convergence of measurement and experience. The Basel findings sparked a wave of follow-up research. Some studies confirmed the lunar correlations, while others failed to replicate them. This variability, initially frustrating for researchers, eventually revealed important insights about individual differences in lunar sensitivity and the environmental conditions necessary for lunar effects to become apparent. Studies conducted in rural areas with minimal artificial lighting consistently showed stronger lunar correlations than those conducted in urban sleep laboratories. Research involving people who spent significant time outdoors showed more pronounced effects than studies of people who worked primarily indoors. Children and teenagers showed stronger lunar responses than older adults. These patterns suggested that lunar influences on sleep represent a form of environmental sensitivity that varies among individuals and can be masked by modern living conditions. Like other subtle biological rhythms, circadian responses to seasonal light changes, hormonal cycles linked to temperature variations, immune system fluctuations tied to weather patterns, lunar sleep effects appear to be real, but gentle, easily overwhelmed by stronger environmental influences. The challenge became not whether lunar effects exist, but rather understanding when and how they operate. This required a shift from seeking simple yes or no answers to developing more nuanced models that could account for individual variation, environmental context, and the complex interactions between different biological systems. Dr. Anne-Marie Chang, who studies circadian rhythms at Penn State, describes this evolution in thinking. We've moved from asking whether the moon affects sleep to asking how lunar influences interact with other factors that determine sleep quality. The answer isn't the same for everyone, but that doesn't make the effects less real for people who experience them. This individualized understanding aligns remarkably well with traditional knowledge systems, which typically recognize that different people show different degrees of sensitivity to lunar influences. Traditional practitioners often developed personalized approaches to lunar sleep management, recognizing that what worked for one person might not be effective for another. Let your shoulders soften, releasing any tension they might be carrying. The integration of scientific and traditional perspectives has been particularly fruitful in understanding the mechanisms behind lunar sleep effects. While traditional knowledge systems describe the phenomenology of lunar influences, what people experienced and when, modern neuroscience has begun to identify the biological pathways through which these influences operate. The discovery that lunar light can suppress melatonin production provides a plausible mechanism for traditional observations about full moon insomnia. The finding that lunar cycles correlate with variations in brainwave patterns during sleep offers scientific support for traditional claims about lunar effects on dream intensity and sleep quality. Research on gravitational influences on cerebrospinal fluid dynamics, while still preliminary, suggests possible explanations for traditional observations about lunar effects on mental clarity, emotional processing, and the subjective experience of different sleep phases. These mechanistic insights don't diminish the value of traditional knowledge, but rather provide scientific frameworks for understanding why traditional practices were often effective. When Ayurvedic practitioners recommended specific herbs during certain lunar phases, they might have been working with plants whose active compounds were particularly effective for the types of sleep disruption that lunar influences tend to create. When traditional Chinese medicine suggested different sleep positioning during different lunar phases, these recommendations might have optimized cerebrospinal fluid flow in ways that compensated for gravitational variations. When indigenous cultures timed healing ceremonies around specific lunar phases, they might have been working with periods when the brain's neuroplasticity and receptivity to therapeutic interventions were naturally enhanced. The collaboration between scientific and traditional approaches has also revealed the importance of expectation and belief in how lunar influences are experienced. While the biological effects of lunar cycles on sleep appear to be real and measurable, the subjective experience of these effects can be significantly influenced by cultural beliefs, personal expectations, and awareness of lunar phases. This doesn't invalidate the biological findings, but adds another layer of complexity to understanding how lunar influences operate in real-world contexts. Someone who expects full moon nights to bring poor sleep might experience lunar effects more intensely due to the interaction between biological changes and psychological anticipation. Conversely, someone who understands lunar sleep variations as natural and temporary might experience less distress when they occur. Dr. Rachel Matthews, a sleep psychologist who works with patients experiencing lunar-related sleep difficulties, has found that education about the science behind lunar effects often helps people manage them more effectively. When people understand that their full moon insomnia has a biological basis, they often feel less anxious about it, she explains. That reduction in anxiety can itself improve sleep quality, creating a positive feedback loop. We can breathe together in this moment, honoring both ancient wisdom and modern understanding. The integration of scientific and traditional perspectives has practical applications for contemporary sleep medicine. Some sleep clinics now ask patients about family cultural backgrounds and any traditional sleep practices that might be relevant to their individual patterns. This information can help clinicians understand whether patients might be particularly sensitive to environmental rhythms like lunar cycles. Sleep tracking technologies are beginning to incorporate lunar awareness into their algorithms. Apps that help people optimize their sleep timing can now factor in lunar phases as one variable among many that might influence individual sleep patterns. While these applications are still experimental, they represent growing recognition that personalized sleep optimization might benefit from considering natural environmental rhythms. The pharmaceutical industry has also taken notice of lunar sleep research. Some companies are investigating whether the timing of sleep medication administration might be optimized based on individual patterns of lunar sensitivity. If someone consistently experiences melatonin suppression during full moon periods, they might benefit from slightly adjusted timing or dosing of sleep medications during those times. Research on shift workers, people whose occupational schedules conflict with natural circadian rhythms, has found that awareness of lunar cycles might help optimize work schedules and sleep strategies. Night shift workers who are particularly sensitive to lunar influences might perform better when their schedules account for natural variations in alertness and sleep quality across lunar phases. The military and space exploration programs have shown interest in this research, investigating how lunar sensitivity might affect personnel performance during extended deployments or missions. Understanding individual patterns of lunar responsiveness might help in personnel selection and mission planning for situations where optimal cognitive performance is crucial. But perhaps the most significant application of this scientific traditional integration is in helping individuals develop more nuanced and effective relationships with their own sleep patterns. Instead of viewing occasional sleep variations as problems to be eliminated, people can learn to recognize and work with their natural rhythms, including any sensitivity they might have to lunar cycles. Let your breathing deepen, following its own steady rhythm. The story that emerges when science meets traditional sleep wisdom is not one of validation or refutation, but of deepening understanding. Traditional knowledge systems preserved accurate observations about lunar influences on human consciousness across thousands of years, even without understanding the biological mechanisms involved. Modern science has begun to identify these mechanisms while confirming many traditional observations about the phenomenology of lunar sleep effects. This convergence suggests that the most complete understanding of human sleep comes from integrating multiple ways of knowing, the subjective reports of people who have carefully observed their own sleep patterns. The accumulated wisdom of cultures that lived closer to natural rhythms and the precise measurements of contemporary sleep science. The meeting place where science encounters story is not a battlefield where one must triumph over the other, but a collaborative space where different forms of knowledge can inform and enrich each other. The indigenous grandmother who can predict which grandchildren will sleep poorly during full moon nights carries knowledge that complements the sleep researcher measuring REM cycles in a laboratory thousands of miles away. Your own experience of sleep, the nights when rest comes easily and the nights when it seems to dance just beyond reach, represents another form of data in this ongoing investigation. The patterns you notice, the correlations you discover between your sleep and various environmental factors, the strategies you develop for working with your individual sleep rhythms. All of this contributes to our collective understanding of how human consciousness relates to natural cycles. Modern sleep science is discovering that optimal sleep health requires attention to individual variation, environmental context, and the complex interactions between biological systems and lived experience. This mirrors the approaches of traditional knowledge systems, which typically emphasized personalized practices developed through careful attention to individual patterns and responses. The integration of scientific and traditional perspectives offers hope for developing more effective and sustainable approaches to sleep health. Instead of relying solely on pharmaceutical interventions or technological solutions, we might develop integrated approaches that combine the precision of modern medicine with the wisdom embedded in traditional practices. This doesn't mean returning to pre-scientific approaches to health, but rather creating more comprehensive frameworks that can account for the full complexity of human sleep experience. The person who occasionally experiences full moon insomnia might benefit from understanding both the neurobiological mechanisms that contribute to this pattern and the traditional strategies that cultures around the world have developed for managing lunar sleep variations. As you prepare for rest tonight, you can know that your sleep experience connects you to both ancient wisdom and cutting-edge research. The traditional lullabies that may have been sung to your ancestors and the sophisticated measurement technologies in modern sleep laboratories are both investigating the same fundamental questions. How does human consciousness relate to the rhythms of the natural world? What conditions promote the deepest and most restorative sleep? How can we work with our individual patterns and sensitivities to optimize our nightly journey into rest and dream? We can rest in this convergence, in the understanding that science and story are not opposing forces but complementary approaches to understanding the mystery of human consciousness under celestial influence. The research continues in sleep laboratories around the world, where scientists measure the electrical rhythms of sleeping minds with ever-increasing precision. The wisdom traditions continue in families and communities where people share observations about sleep patterns and natural cycles. Both forms of investigation contribute to our evolving understanding of what it means to be human under the influence of moon and star. Tonight, as you settle towards sleep, you participate in both the ancient tradition of sleeping under lunar light and the modern experiment of living as conscious beings who can study their own consciousness. Your rest becomes part of the ongoing conversation between science and story, between measurement and experience, between the particular details of your individual sleep and the universal rhythms that connect all human consciousness to the cosmos above. In this meeting place where science encounters story, we discover that the most profound truths about sleep may be both measurably real and mysteriously poetic, both individually unique and universally shared. Let your eyes close if they wish. The conversation continues in the language of dreams, where ancient wisdom and modern discovery speak with the same voice. The moon outside your window tonight, whether it appears as a silver crescent or remains invisible in its new phase, is the same celestial companion that has watched over human sleep for hundreds of thousands of years. As you prepare for rest, you join an unbroken chain of consciousness that stretches from the first humans who noticed how certain nights felt different from others, through generations of careful observers who mapped the subtle relationships between celestial cycles and human awareness, to contemporary researchers measuring brainwaves in sophisticated laboratories. What we have discovered together in this gentle exploration is not a simple answer to the question of lunar influence on human sleep, but rather an appreciation for the elegant complexity of how consciousness remains connected to cosmic rhythms, even in our modern, artificially lit world. Let your breathing settle into its own natural pace as we integrate these insights into a peaceful understanding. The scientific evidence, while subtle, is consistent. Lunar cycles do influence human sleep architecture in measurable ways. During full moon periods, many people take longer to fall asleep, spend less time in deep sleep phases, and experience changes in REM sleep patterns that can affect dream intensity and morning recall. These effects operate through multiple pathways: suppression of melatonin production by lunar light, possible gravitational influences on cerebrospinal fluid dynamics, and electromagnetic interactions that we are only beginning to understand. But the effects are not universal or overwhelming. Individual sensitivity varies dramatically, influenced by genetics, age, living environment, and personal circadian rhythm strength. People who live in brightly lit urban environments may experience minimal direct lunar effects, while those in darker settings or with high environmental sensitivity may notice strong correlations between lunar phases and their sleep experience. Traditional knowledge systems from cultures around the world preserved accurate observations about these lunar sleep relationships across thousands of years, developing practical wisdom for working with rather than against natural sleep rhythms. The convergence of this traditional wisdom with modern sleep science suggests that optimal sleep health benefits from understanding both the biological mechanisms of lunar influence and the time-tested strategies for managing sleep variations. This understanding invites a shift in how we relate to our own sleep patterns. Instead of viewing occasional sleep variations as problems to be eliminated, we might learn to recognize them as part of the natural rhythms that connect us to larger environmental cycles. We can rest here in this expanded perspective. Perhaps the most important insight from our exploration is that you are not separate from the natural world, despite how urban living might sometimes make it seem. Deep within your brain, ancient biological systems continue to respond to environmental signals that your conscious mind might barely notice. Your circadian rhythms, hormone production, and neural activity patterns retain sensitivity to the same celestial cycles that guided your ancestors' daily and nightly activities. This connection doesn't require belief or conscious attention to operate. Your pineal gland will continue monitoring environmental light levels, whether or not you pay attention to lunar phases. Your cerebrospinal fluid will continue its subtle responses to gravitational variations regardless of whether you track the moon's position in the sky. Your sleep architecture will continue showing the gentle variations that researchers measure in their laboratories, adding your individual patterns to the collective data that reveals our species' ongoing relationship with cosmic rhythms. But conscious awareness of these connections can transform how you experience the occasional nights when sleep feels different. When you lie awake during a full moon, not anxious but alert, not troubled but somehow more present to the subtle energies moving through your body and mind, you might recognize this as an echo of ancient attunement rather than a sign that something is wrong with your sleep. The practical applications of lunar sleep awareness are gentle and flexible, meant to work with your individual patterns rather than impose universal rules. If you notice that your sleep consistently varies with lunar phases, you might experiment with subtle adjustments to your evening routine during full moon periods. Perhaps going to bed slightly earlier, engaging in more relaxing pre-sleep activities, or using blackout curtains to minimize light exposure. If you don't notice any correlation between your sleep and lunar cycles, that's equally normal and healthy. Lunar sensitivity varies among individuals, and lack of sensitivity doesn't indicate anything problematic about your sleep or circadian systems. Let your shoulders soften, releasing any tension they might be carrying. The goal is not to become dependent on lunar calendars, or to plan your life around celestial cycles, but rather to develop a more nuanced and compassionate relationship with your own sleep patterns. Some nights will naturally bring deeper rest, others will offer different qualities of awareness and restoration. Learning to work with these variations rather than struggling against them often leads to better overall sleep health. For parents, understanding lunar sleep influences might provide reassurance when children experience occasional sleep difficulties that seem to coincide with bright lunar phases. Children's developing circadian systems are often more sensitive to environmental changes, making them more likely to show noticeable responses to lunar cycles. Recognizing this as a normal aspect of human biology can reduce parental anxiety and help families develop appropriate strategies for managing sleep variations. For healthcare providers, awareness of lunar sleep patterns might enhance patient care by providing context for understanding sleep complaints that show temporal patterns. While lunar sensitivity should never be the primary focus of sleep medicine, it can be one factor among many that helps explain individual sleep experiences. For anyone interested in optimizing their sleep health, lunar awareness offers another tool for understanding personal sleep patterns, like tracking the effects of caffeine, exercise, stress, or seasonal changes. Paying attention to how your sleep correlates with lunar phases can provide valuable information for developing personalized approaches to sleep hygiene. The broader implications of lunar sleep research extend beyond individual applications into questions about human adaptation and environmental health. The persistence of lunar sensitivity in modern humans suggests that we retain biological connections to natural rhythms that our ancestors relied upon for survival and well-being. This doesn't mean we need to return to pre-industrial lifestyles, but it might mean developing greater appreciation for the subtle ways natural environments continue to influence human health. The benefits of spending time outdoors, reducing artificial light exposure in the evening hours, and maintaining some connection to seasonal and celestial cycles may be more significant than our urban-focused culture typically recognizes. We can breathe together in this moment, honoring both our modern capabilities and our ancient heritage. As research into lunar sleep influences continues, we may discover additional mechanisms through which celestial cycles affect human consciousness. The electromagnetic variations associated with lunar positions, the gravitational effects on biological fluid dynamics, and the complex interactions between multiple environmental rhythms remain active areas of investigation. But perhaps more important than identifying every mechanism is learning to inhabit our humanity with greater wisdom and flexibility. We are beings whose consciousness emerged from millions of years of evolution under natural lighting conditions, whose circadian systems developed in relationship to celestial cycles, whose sleep patterns retain sensitivity to environmental rhythms that connect us to the larger community of life on Earth. Your sleep tonight will unfold within this larger context, your individual rest becoming part of the eternal conversation between human consciousness and cosmic rhythm. Whether the moon outside is bright or absent, whether you feel its influence strongly or barely at all, you participate in patterns older than civilization, deeper than individual memory. The brain waves that will soon carry you into sleep follow the same basic patterns that characterized human consciousness when our ancestors first looked up at the moon and wondered about its influence on their inner lives. The neural pathways that coordinate your transitions between different sleep phases emerged from the same evolutionary processes that shaped every aspect of human experience under natural conditions. Yet your sleep tonight is also uniquely your own, influenced by the particular circumstances of your life, your individual sensitivities and patterns, your personal approaches to rest and restoration. In this uniqueness, you contribute something new to the ongoing human experiment in how consciousness adapts to changing environmental conditions. Let your breathing deepen, following its own ancient wisdom. The lunar influence on your sleep is neither a mystical force that controls your destiny, nor a simple mechanical effect that can be precisely predicted and manipulated. It is part of the subtle poetry that connects inner experience to outer environment, individual awareness to universal rhythm, the intimate space of your dreams to the vast cosmos that surrounds our small planet. Understanding this influence doesn't require changing your life dramatically, but rather developing a gentler, more accepting relationship with the natural variations in how rest comes to you. Some nights, sleep will arrive like a trusted friend, easy and familiar. Other nights, it may approach more slowly, inviting you into a different quality of awareness before finally settling into deeper rest. Both experiences are part of the normal range of human sleep under natural conditions. Both connect you to the rhythms that have guided consciousness across millions of years of evolution. Both deserve to be met with patience rather than anxiety, curiosity rather than frustration. As you settle toward sleep tonight, you can rest in the knowledge that you are held by rhythms larger than individual concerns, deeper than daily worries. Your sleep unfolds within patterns that connect you to every human who has ever closed their eyes under moonlight, adding your individual experience to a collective song that began with the first stirring of consciousness and will continue as long as humans dream under star-scattered skies. The moon may pull at distant oceans with forces measured by physicists, but it touches your sleep with influences so gentle they can barely be detected by the most sensitive instruments. These subtle effects remind us that the boundaries between inner and outer worlds are more permeable than our everyday experience suggests, that we remain connected to natural rhythms in ways both measurable and mysterious. Tonight, as your consciousness settles toward the threshold of sleep, you join not only the immediate community of those preparing for rest around the world, but also the timeless community of all humans who have ever wondered about the relationship between celestial cycles and the intimate landscape of dreams. In this moment, you can simply be present to your breath, to the comfort of your body, settling toward rest, to the quiet understanding that your sleep participates in rhythms both personal and universal, both ancient and immediate. The exploration continues in the realm of dreams, where the boundaries between self and cosmos dissolve into the deeper patterns that connect all consciousness to the eternal dance of earth and moon and star. Let your eyes close when they're ready. The rhythm holds you, patient and eternal as the tides, gentle and persistent as moonlight on water. Rest well in the knowledge that you are home in the universe, that your sleep tonight adds its own quiet note to the endless lullaby that sings human consciousness toward rest under the watching light of the moon. Sweet dreams, and thank you for this gentle journey through the mystery of lunar sleep. Until we meet again in the quiet spaces where science and story converge, where ancient wisdom and modern discovery speak with one voice about the beautiful complexity of human consciousness under celestial influence. The rhythm continues, and you are part of it, now and always.